important aspect of archaeological inquiry is understanding what types of past environments were like that people were living in. To do that, we have a host of techniques that we employ to understand past environments. One of those is dendrochronology. We're here at the University of Georgia's Tree Ling Laboratory to understand this technique. And I'm going to find Kat Napor, and she's going to tell us all about it. Oh, Kat, there you are. How's it going?
Welcome to UGA's Laboratory of Archaeology. Here we are at the Tree Ring Lab studying dendrochronology, the scientific study of tree rings.
So, Kat, I noticed you have these big slabs of wood. What are these things called?
We call these cookies, just like you'd call a snack.
Well, I don't know if we should take a bite out of these, right? So you've got these samples here, right? And so how exactly does one go about doing dendrochronology?
Well, Victor, an important principle of dendrochronology is that trees in temperate environments grow one ring every year. One ring is made up of the light-colored early wood that's laid down in the spring and the darker-colored late wood that's laid down in the late summer and early fall. So one annual ring consists of both the light and the dark part of the wood. And the width of these rings is based on environmental factors. These environmental factors, the major one is what we call the limiting factor. Here in Georgia, that limiting factor is precipitation. So in a dry year, a tree will grow a thin ring, and in a wet year, it'll grow a thick ring.
That's fantastic. These trees look really old. There are hundreds of rings here. How old are these?
These are mostly bald cypress trees that we have here on these shelves. They were recovered with the help of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. You might know bald cypress trees and have seen them growing in swamps with their distinctive knees sticking out of the water. But you might not have known that these trees can live for thousands of years. This tree we have here lived for almost 1,000 years. And when it was dying, the last of the pyramids were being built in Egypt.
Wow, that's fantastic. So, you have your sample, you have prepared it. What is the next step, to understand, the climate that this tree was living in?
The next step is to try to develop what we call a chronology, which is a chart of ring widths across time. And to do this, we use both computer programs and physical measurements. I have here what are called skeleton plots. These are graphs of the thickness and thinness of rings in these different trees. On a skeleton plot, the longer the line is, the thinner the ring is. So we make these skeleton plots for every tree sample that we have, and then we match the patterns up, which is called cross-dating.
So, in order to get a sense of the exact calendar year of these trees, how do we go about accomplishing that? That this ring represents, a specific calendar year. How do we do that?
So that's one of the really cool things about dendrochronology, is that we're able to get exact calendar dates based on these trees. Once we finish this project, we should be able to look at this tree and say, for instance, this year is 2632 BC. And the way we do this is by starting with modern trees and using this principle of cross-dating, where the ring width ought to correspond between trees. The first step is to find a modern tree and core it, so we know exactly what year the most recent ring is. In this case, 2018, the current year. We then find older and older samples of wood and match those ring widths up together, in effect pushing the chronology farther and farther back into the past.
So in essence, all this is about pattern recognition.
Exactly.
You start with the modern and you start to sort of link it back over time. And in this sense, how far back can you go?
Well, the longest chronologies in the world are over 10,000 years old. Here, we're really excited that we have about 6,000 years worth of trees from the Georgia coast. So we're creating a pattern of environmental factors over the last 6,000 years, so we can figure out exactly what year different climatic conditions were prevailing on the coast, and therefore use that to talk about archaeology and how people might have experienced the coastal environment.
So Kat, tell us about this project. Tell us about some of the things that you're starting to learn by looking at what essentially are dead trees that are thousands of years old.
Well, from all of these samples, like I said, collected with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, we're able to match these patterns together. We currently have an overlapping chronology for these 6,000 years, so we're going to be able to tell exactly what year we're looking at. And what we're starting to see is that during a period called the late Archaic, when there was there was the abandonment of some large-scale coastal archaeological sites where people had relied heavily on estuary resources. We see some environmental fluctuation happening. And as Victor has studied in the past, there seem to have been different levels of resilience among different people who lived in different areas. And what we're seeing in these tree rings seems to indicate that some people were able to hold on a little bit longer during negative environmental conditions. And I think this is really important, not just for the study of the past, but for the study of the present, how we can learn about better ways to use our resources today to make them more sustainable in the future.
That's exactly right, Kat. So Kat's work is really important. So what she's talking about is around 3,800 years ago, there was some large-scale environmental change, and that changed the way in which people were living on the coast. And her work is going to add to that story and help us tell this narrative about how people interacted with past environments. And from there, like you said, we can use that as a story to talk about our own relationship with the changing environment that is we're currently experiencing today, right?
That's right, Victor. We live in a period of increasingly dramatic climate change, and learning about the past and the lessons we can learn from past peoples is incredibly important.
Kat, this is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today and to teach us a little bit about what you're doing and your fantastic project.
Thank you, Victor.
Kat, these trees are really old. How did they survive for so long?
Well, you can tell how great these trees look, Victor. They look like they were fresh, just cut down yesterday. And that's because they've been buried down in the mud, sometimes 30 feet deep on the Georgia coast in an anoxic environment, which means that there's no oxygen for bacteria to thrive that would usually cause the decay of organisms like these trees. You want to see what was happening during the lifespan of one of these trees?
Let's see it, yeah.
This tree lived during the medieval period in Europe, which roughly corresponds to the woodland period in the Americas. While this tree was alive, some really cool things happened. Angkor Wat, the famous temple complex in Cambodia, was constructed. Also, Gothic architecture, the famous architecture of European cathedrals, really took off. And finally, this tree was alive when Venetian Marco Polo went to meet with Kublai Khan, the leader of the Mongol Empire.
Wow, that is a lot of history in one cookie.
It sure is.